Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Shelley must have been prescient, or she arranged these things very carefully and somehow knew what we were all going to say just from our abstracts. I'm going to build on what the previous two speakers have said and start with an invitation. I'm not going to be presenting a lot of data and conclusions today. I've done that many other times. I'm presenting some calls to action and some discussion about things that are going to happen in the future. 15 years ago, first time I stood before a lectern and gave a community of practice presentation about Habitat, the first avatar system in Austin, Texas. And at the time we were saying, look, we're starting to build these communication systems on, well, it was before the internet, but people are starting to connect together, and we're seeing some really interesting interactions. And we'd like to call on academics and people who have studied this for centuries before and help them advise our designs. I stopped going to the cyberspace conference the next year when the response seemed to be literary criticism. The social sciences didn't seem ready to talk about people interacting online very much yet. Basically, it took the web. It took the web exploding and lots of people coming online. And a generation, 15 years is almost a generation, of people to come through programs where engineering or access to computers, and seeing computers as communications devices instead of computation devices before to put together this group. I think this is the group I hoped I had 15 years ago. I am a practitioner. I am not a scientist. And I'd love as much help from y'all as I can possibly get. It's about partially formed questions and some interim answers. So I'm going to build out in a different direction. I'm not sure if there's literature at scale. I know about the group stuff. I would love to hear you talk for another hour about other experiments in the small scale. Clay Shirky has posted some great rants about social software at the small scale. I'm not talking about technical scale here. I'm talking about what happens when millions and potentially billions of people are contributing to social software, and some of them into one big pile. I'm not going to talk about the small stuff. I'm almost going to pick up where Robert left off. Not all social computing scales well. It shouldn't be required to scale well. And some of it is actually better designed for small. And as been, I've kind of amended this talk overnight. Some context and scale limits may, in fact, even at the large, be necessary. If you talk about corporate context, there are reasons to have a boundary there. Likewise, there are probably socio-cultural ones. All of those are interesting. Some of those I still think are incredibly large and suffer from some of these scale discussions that I'd like to bring up. But I want to talk about the larger stuff. At scale, social computing produces low-cost, high-value information markets. As user value increases with applications like email, search engines, eBay, massively multiplayer online games, instant messaging, blogs, and other applications, incentive for abuse increases because of real value is put into these large systems. Spam being the first and obvious one, but for some reason when we designed blogs, we kind of ignored it, and sure enough, we ended up with comment and trackback spam. Likewise, fraud, click-through fraud on current advertising revenue models and transaction fraud on eBay, and that interacts even with multiplayer games. And there are intellectual property issues at scale. When people start contributing large amounts of stuff to piles, I mean, it's not just illegal music, it's also other forms of intellectual property that are being copied, distributed. So I want to kind of turn our minds towards what else we can expect coming forward with the current experiments in large-scale social computing, and what can we do for or about it, depending upon whether you have a positive or negative view. So I have a big background in multiplayer games, and they blaze one interesting trail, which I'm not sure everyone here has been keeping close eye on. They've been driving some hard questions very fast. I'm going to focus specifically on virtual economies and property law. There's a conference now. It's been one for 2 years called State of Play, which brings together multi-user gaming practitioners and lawyers. And the topic, by far, the biggest topic of interest has been, are virtual goods property? When you kill a monster in a game and it drops a magic sword, does that belong to you? Well, the terms of services of these things say it most certainly does not. But that doesn't prevent people from going over to eBay, if the object is transferable in the game, and selling it for several dollars or thousands of dollars, depending upon the thing. There's a kind of arrogance, and I agree with Robert on this, which is we look for reactions. Practitioners and designers of systems, we like to watch what our users do and go, wow, they did something really unexpected. That was wonderful. And so this eBay market is one of those things. In virtual reality, it was when people first put the goggles on 15 years ago. Software developers went, they put it on, and this guy put it on and put on the glove, and then he got sick. Isn't that great? Because we were so excited to see a real-world reaction to a physical reaction to our stuff. I couldn't think. It's like, that's a horrible bug. So I tend to think a little bit of these virtual economies. Some of them are horrible bugs. Some of them are things that the systems were not designed to cope with. Interesting notice you might not have heard is Sony is going to open a real cash transaction market for EverQuest 2, in which they're going to take the middleman out, eBay, disintermediating eBay, and put in their own intermediation. That way they can reduce their customer care costs and reduce fraud in these transactions. Blizzard, who makes Worlds of Warcraft, has taken the exact opposite view and has said, the game is the game and the world is the world, the real world, and never the twain should meet. But what's really interesting about this is lawyers want in on the action. They were literally at the last State of Play talking about whether or not your Epic mount should count as a part of your estate when you die. Are these taxable transactions? This is a very real and scary thing. So when we talk about social scale, one of the important things to realize is it rubs up against the real world. And they seem very excited to be getting in on this action. So I proposed, at that conference the last time, I proposed an alternative of something I called Kid Trade. On the Habitat Chronicles blog, I have a paper which proposes an economic model which allows people to trade using an anonymous market that mitigates eBay and doesn't have a cash market. I didn't even really have to design that. I think some people here told me their kids use Toontown from Disneyland. There's a game, a multiplayer online game, that has no online trading between the players and therefore has no offline market. My point to them, and the challenge here, is to remember that practitioners do have control with design, and your designs can be designed to leak or not leak. And that is, we no longer should just think it's cool that it leaks. We should, be, as much as it's possible, plan for it. Another one is to embrace another alternative is embrace a different goods model, and that's Second Life. Second Life doesn't have monsters that produce swords when they drop. They don't have this magically creative economy. The economy is built out of people actually putting original intellectual property, creating objects, and then selling them to each other. So they actually own their intellectual property in that space. That unfortunately confuses discussion, because intellectual property ownership and virtual property ownership are different things. But I just wanted to raise some of those issues to your awareness. Social networking plays another trail. There's so much to talk about in social networking. I'm going to try to keep it narrow here. We learned that network effects could grow social network systems beyond their designs in short order. The first generation social networking software ran out of scale, both physically and socially. They came to a screeching halt as people started using them. And then, of course, they found out that people were sharing too much information and had too little to do with it. Next generation stuff that's coming out now allows people to share, micropublish, or live aggregate, depending upon who you want to listen to. But the users want to control who they're sharing with. So selective disclosure is a new thing that's coming up on the internet. So we want to be watching that too. So there's some challenges. As things scale up, it's very clear that people are confused and are worried about their boundaries of identity disclosure. I've heard several people in this room talk about this before, so I'm not going to go too deep. There is an asymmetry, which is I want to know everything about you without revealing anything about myself. and I've heard this over and over from customers of Yahoo, for example. And for many transaction types, this is not, it isn't very reasonable. So people need the next best thing, which is how can I decide who I'm going to trust? So surprise, this is really a talk about reputation. How do we scale? And the short answer is you hand the trust equation over to users. We need to provide reputation building tools. And this is where I'm really looking for call for help, because I don't think this exists at scale anywhere. So I feel like, once again, a blazing practitioner is about to bang his head against the wall when he could have got the insight of others. And we're doing this now. With Yahoo's mails, this is spam button. That's a reputation system. People whack on that, and it has side effects, and the side effects are this item gets marked as more probabilistically as spam. The text which is in it gets marked more probabilistically as spam. The person who clicked on it has their reputation modified based on the number of times they said something was spam and other people said things were spam, and so on. So you build a model which is actually pretty good at identifying spam. And how did you do it? By asking people to touch the button. So let's consider the evolution of web search as we start looking at new emerging things like tagging. Originally, web search used meta keywords, and we got that from NetNews. People self-tagged things. Early search engines just used those, read the meta tags, and returned the results. I was at a company, and we put all kinds of amazing tags in there to get on search engines. It turns out it's a bad idea. We learned that, right? That trusting the author to be truthful in a high-value market, not really a good idea. They self-optimize. A better idea was PageRank, the first global scale reputation system. So I want to ask is, what do we learn from this as we look at tagging? Sorry, some people have said they're tired of hearing about tagging, but I want to talk about it a little bit. This is a quick overview of tagging. I have heard some people didn't have a clear picture of what it was. Really quickly, you take a resource, which is not text usually, like a picture. When you upload it, it has no context whatsoever. People add context by putting tags on it. It's one mechanism. You get better relevance and network effects. There's also a separate kind of metadata which you can get by sharing. So if you have a social network, the fact that your friends have it, recommender systems and things like that. So you can improve your relevance and gain network effects by tapping into the community's expertise. That's pretty much what tagging is as a summary. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about search reputation or a really simple description of PageRank. And for those who know it, I apologize, but I know there are several people in the room who don't. You have a website, in this case, Anne's Grill, and there are links into it. And the names of the links. And so the links are tags in the very real sense of the way we think of tagging. So you look at the link text pointing in. It says Annie Gold's Burger Bar, delicious hamburgers, favorite bar in Redmond and San Francisco. You do a little analysis on those. You can figure out what they mean. But people do evil things, like Annie is evil. Right? And so we have to figure out what the reputation of these pages. How do we know which one of these to trust? Is it really a good burger bar? Or is it all about the fact that Annie's evil? And she's made up these other tags. So we recurse. We walk out and we looked at who points at them. And you run this really big equation. It takes a long time. That propagates reputation out from the distance into the center. And if you see all the little numbers, this one shows that those numbers all collapsed and with the solidity of the bar representing a reputation weight. And since Annie is evil, has no real reputation, we take it out. And it looks like, we can tell from here, that Annie's Grill has delicious hamburgers. So if you type in delicious hamburgers into the search engine, Annie's Grill comes back. But we have the tagging dilemma. So now we have an image, and it's being self-tagged. And this one I put free. This is a porn image, supposedly. Free MP3 XXX digital camera Britney Spears porn. The weird one here is the abusive links are free MP3 Britney Spears and digital camera. Where do we get the reputation for these tags? Right? So if we're applying this kind of reputation model, which I think is probably a good one, where do we get the reputation? Some algorithms. And again, these are a practice, so I'm looking for feedback. There are two basic forms of ways for users to rate tags, what I call positive and negative reputation. Positive is people, there are some systems where people type in their own tags, and then one system gathers them all up and counts them, and if you get a large number of something, that must be a valid tag for that thing. Negative reputation is the same thing as the spam button you're saying. So if there's if it's tagged as a penguin, and you can click, this is not a penguin. So there's kind of, so many people say it's a penguin, this is not a penguin. These kind of models are really simple to implement, like the spam button, but they're subject to all kinds of interesting gaming effects in reputation systems. There's something called the early mover effect, which is whoever gets their penguin up first wins, because everyone says this is a good penguin, and then the new guys in, you get freshness and serendipity. Another one is just like that other thing I said about spammer reputation, you can have tagger reputation. As someone is known for putting better and better tags up, their stuff floats, for example, to the top of search. And so once you run such an algorithm, you do the same kind of a reduction. So it turns out this is a porn image, not a free MP3. So wait, doesn't that mean something? We just got done talking about high-value markets and reputation systems. Yes, reputation systems produce their own information markets and are ripe for abuse, which means we have our work cut out for us. Thank you. I'll take questions.
Sometimes we don't know the great artists or the great architects like Frank Lloyd Wright, or he was famous for his life, but until after they're dead, which means that their contemporaries don't necessarily understand the value of their contribution to the art. With tagging, when you put the reputation overlay on top of that, I don't think there's a risk of sort of stifling that sort of.
Absolutely. So this was a particular reputation algorithm, which kind of biases for freshness. It biases for consensus, biases for popularity. So that's one of the reasons I said earlier there might be containers. And I was very interested I had the benefit of being on both the panel yesterday, also asking about context. That when you're talking one global context, you always have this problem of, well, but that's not what I was interested in. It's not the best. It's not, what are the dimensions? So I believe also that this exists in context space. So starting at the scale end, because it's a much harder problem. There's not as much research on it, but we're doing it. We're already doing incredibly massive search engines. We're going to do incredibly massive video search and incredibly massive audio search and image search. It's coming down. It's practice. So I'm really interested in feedback on important contexts. So for example, what you just said there was an interesting point. Recognized by his peers. Would he have been recognized by the community at large or some other context previous to when his peers recognized him? Which one matters? It's like Golden Globes and the Academy Awards, right? More questions? I'll get you in there, Kevin.
Yeah. I think one of the implicit things in the early part of your discussion was that practitioners ought to be trying to lead and think about implications of their designs in ways that maybe are other than is this really commercially successful, is this a move, does it grow, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, you acknowledge you're supposed to be responding to what users are requesting and asking for. And I think there's kind of a problem. What other standards do you appeal to that you're not really on the, does this grow the business? For a poignant example, like MySpace is something that users really, really want is to be able to see exactly who's viewed their page.
Right.
Something I think came up at one of the sites in Korea. We could provide them that information. It would be costly to us to do so. And we also were worried that it would lead to this kind of, privacy fanaticism or just all kinds of weird implications. We've also thought of going a model where you say, hey, maybe you should pay for that. And then you could also pay not to have your viewing revealed to other people. So these are the ideas that have occurred to us, and I wonder what other standards other than, which would make us the most money or grow the site the most, one maybe ought to think about.
It's an interesting question. I think what I'm appealing for is the information which tells us what the users want, which is derived, since there's been a lot of synthesis in academia, is there's two ways to just, I think Rob put it really well. There's two ways to capture that. One is to find out where the synthesis is and draw from it and do experiments, or shoot in the dark, which is what us practitioners have been doing. And we've been lucky enough that things like network effects and other things kind of cover for our mistakes. So I don't have that's a design discussion. I'll talk to you about it offline maybe. But I think users don't always know what they want.
Yeah.
And sometimes they want things they don't. They think they want things they don't want. I learned this in multiplayer gaming over and over and over again. They asked for features that, if they'd had them, they would have quit. So I want to get this in because I don't want to hold up the next person.
Just wanted to quickly push back on the method issue.
Right.
As you said, you can't trust authors to talk about their own work, and that's obviously not true. People do care about their own work. What you can't trust them to do is to invisibly do it. Because the meta tags are invisible, they're not visible to the reader, and they're not even visible to the author, so people don't necessarily know what's in there. Whereas if you make them explicitly tag their stuff visibly, then there is the reputation feedback is there, because they're not going to start putting Britney Spears XXX on their own work, unless that's what they really think it's about.
Well, no, in practice, that's not true. Porn people do, in fact, tag their stuff inappropriately, and it doesn't harm their reputation. So yours is not consider the abuse version of that scenario, not the friendly version. Yeah, the people who are abusing the system have no problem having that people know they're abusing the system. But it is damaging the system for the rest of us. Right? A search result that returns inappropriate search results is wrong.
Sure, that's abuse stuff that you remove. You were saying.
I'm just saying, how do you find that abuse stuff?
Well, you find it easily by seeing that it's not there. Yeah. Then that feeds into how you produce feedback mechanisms later on.